In August 2009, an event shocked the family of 27-year-old Rachel Beats, a former kindergarten teacher who lived in the northern suburbs of Melbourne, Australia. The girl vanished without a trace, triggering a high-profile investigation that exposed the true face of the law enforcement system. Rachel grew up as an only child until the age of 11, when her parents divorced. Her mother, wanting to settle her personal life, got together with a man who already had children from a previous marriage. Thus, Rachel became an older sister and quickly bonded with her stepsisters. From childhood, she was known as a kind, open, and sociable girl who easily found common ground with people of all ages. Rachel helped her mother with household chores, looked after the younger children, and supported her during difficult times. As she grew older, Rachel became interested in the profession of a kindergarten teacher, as she had a knack for educating and nurturing her younger siblings. The girl got along so well with children that she decided to dedicate her life and career to them, despite the fact that she herself could not have children due to health issues. This did not stop her from getting an education and starting work as a teacher at the age of 27. Despite this, Rachel always dreamed of having her own children. Therefore, in 2008, she gladly welcomed into her home in Epping, near Sydney, 2 teenage girls who had problems in dysfunctional families. For them, Rachel became a true guardian angel, to whom they fled from domestic quarrels. However, Rachel's loved ones were worried that the teenagers might have a negative impact on her. Indeed, sometimes there were problems with them, because of which the girl could not arrange her personal life. Moreover, it affected her finances, as Rachel earned little and helped the girls with money, sometimes giving away her last and severely limiting herself. To cope with financial difficulties, Rachel took a second job, but overestimated her strength and soon lost it. Troubles were piling up like a snowball, debts were growing, and during this difficult period, the girl started a relationship with a guy who, as it turned out later, was associated with a bad crowd. They used prohibited substances and eventually got Rachel hooked on them as well. There she met John Leslie Combs, a close friend of her boyfriend. According to acquaintances, over time he began to have a strong influence on her. Since Rachel got involved with the wrong crowd, her life went downhill. The girl was visibly wasting away, her physical condition deteriorated, and emotional problems appeared. Due to prolonged drug use, she began to develop paranoia. Sometimes Rachel was delirious and suspected everyone of conspiring against her. Once, a car ran a red light in front of her. Rachel reacted inappropriately, got into an accident, and afterwards claimed that it was all set up. Rachel's once attractive appearance changed. Even her teeth, thanks to which her smile was so charming, began to deteriorate from the effects of the girl had to use special plates to protect them. Her home turned into an epicenter of daily parties, where dubious individuals gathered. Rachel's closest friends, learning about her destructive life, desperately tried to save the girl from this abyss, but the power of addiction was too strong, and their efforts were in vain. The tipping point was a party where Rachel, who was with her friend, fainted. They were urgently taken to the hospital, where Rachel, upon regaining consciousness, claimed that she might have been. However, the medical staff, assessing the girl's appearance, concluded that she had a clear addiction. Rachel showed signs of persecution mania and paranoid moods. Her statement was not confirmed, so the doctors were forced to call the appropriate services. The girl was sent to a rehabilitation center, where she underwent treatment and returned home to her mother in the summer. For a while, it seemed that everything was getting better. Rachel stayed away from drugs. But it turned out that the addiction had taken too deep a root in her soul, and old passions took over her again. One warm August evening in 2009, Rachel decided to return to her destructive company, with which she had loud parties almost every day. When the girl was leaving the house, and her family understood where and why she was going, she asked her mother only one question: "If I leave today, will you love me tomorrow?" Her mother, sobbing, answered in the affirmative. These were the last words the family heard from Rachel before her disappearance. From that time on, the girl no longer answered calls and messages. Her phone was turned off, and relatives could not find her. A mother's heart told her that her daughter was in danger. The family turned to the police for help, but law enforcement officers, knowing about Rachel's dark past, were in no hurry to start a search, assuming that the girl was just hanging out somewhere with friends. A week passed, and a gruesome discovery was made southeast of Melbourne. A man jogging on Wetner Beach noticed something unusual on the shore. Coming closer, he realized with horror that it was human remains. Without wasting a minute, the man reported the terrible find to the police. The law enforcement officers who arrived at the scene found only a left female leg with a tattoo in the form of purple flowers on the stem. It was the only lead for the investigation at that moment, as the rest of the body could not be found. On August 18, information about the discovery was made public in the media. One of Rachel's old friends, hearing the news about the tattooed leg, immediately recalled a similar image on the girl's body. Not knowing about her disappearance, he tried to call, but Rachel did not answer. Then the man contacted two teenage girls whom Rachel had once sheltered. He asked when was the last time they saw their caregiver. One of the girls replied that she had not seen Rachel for a long time, but they were waiting for her return after rehabilitation. The other noted that she had recently communicated with her. This seemed strange to the friend, because usually the girls always knew where Rachel was and what she was doing. Meanwhile, the police had already been thoroughly examining the island where the gruesome find was made for the second day. They tirelessly searched for the missing girl's body, but to no avail. It was as if it had vanished into thin air. Law enforcement officers compared the found tattoo with their databases, but there were no matches. Forensic experts, meanwhile, were investigating the nature of the injury. They concluded that the leg belonged to a woman and was separated from the body in the hip joint area. At the same time, the blood loss must have been very significant. The scale and specificity of the damage indicated that the woman was most likely already dead. A family friend who had previously noticed the similarity of the tattoo contacted the police and suggested that the found leg might belong to the missing Rachel. Investigators confirmed that the girl had an identical tattoo and was already wanted as a missing person. Everything added up. Law enforcement officers contacted Rachel's mother to inform her of the terrible news. A DNA examination confirmed the worst fears. Later, on a neighboring island, other body parts were found, and 3 weeks later, fishermen pulled a second leg out of the sea. Although the body of the deceased could not be found in its entirety, the discovered fragments were sufficient for identification. They all belonged to the missing Rachel. Law enforcement officers made every effort to identify the owner of the found limb. They meticulously compared the tattoo with available databases, but no similarities could be found. Meanwhile, forensic experts took up a thorough study of the injury. They came to an unequivocal conclusion: the leg belonged to a woman and was separated from the body in the hip joint area. The nature and extent of the damage indicated that the blood loss was extremely severe, and the chances of finding the victim alive were negligible. Later, a friend of Rachel's family contacted the police, suggesting that the found limb might belong to the missing girl. His hunch was confirmed. Investigators discovered that the tattoo on the leg perfectly matched the one Rachel had. At that time, the girl was already listed as a missing person. All the facts pointed to the worst. When law enforcement officers contacted Rachel's mother to inform her of the terrible news, the results of the DNA examination finally dispelled the last doubts. Soon, on a neighboring island, not far from the site of the first find, other fragments of a human body were discovered. And 3 weeks later, a second leg got entangled in the nets of local fishermen. Unfortunately, it was not possible to find the body of the deceased in its entirety, but the discovered parts were sufficient for identification. They all belonged to the missing Rachel. Detectives began communicating with the relatives and friends of the deceased, trying to find out the circumstances of her death and find those responsible. All those questioned noted that recently Rachel had been associating with rather unpleasant characters. But the greatest concern was caused by 54-year-old John Combs, an aggressive and dangerous man who had recently been released from prison. It was under his pernicious influence that the girl fell. Rachel's relatives did not rule out his involvement in her disappearance. When investigators began to study Combs' personality, they saw that he was an extremely suspicious character. Detectives obtained a warrant to search the house where Rachel lived, and immediately came across an interesting find: numerous diaries in which the victim wrote down the names, surnames and telephone numbers of her acquaintances. Most often, the initials J.C. were found there, which clearly hinted at John Combs. It became obvious to the police that he had the greatest influence on the murdered girl. The teenage girls who lived with Rachel could not help but know what a terrible person he was. They probably guessed where their friend had disappeared to, but preferred to remain silent for fear of sharing her fate. During a conversation with the girls, the police managed to find out that shortly before her disappearance, Rachel assured them of her quick return. But these hopes were not destined to come true. Investigators understood that the teenagers knew much more than they were telling, but fear kept them from being frank. However, later the girls still dared to contact law enforcement officers, wanting to help investigate the murder of the woman who had replaced their mother. And, as it turned out, they really had something to tell. On August 10, 2009, Rachel left Epping for the neighboring town of Heidelberg. After about 20 minutes, she stopped the car and went shopping. There she was picked up by John Combs, the last person to see the girl alive, as the investigation assumed. The next morning, at 6:30, Rachel called her friend. She later noted that there was no sense of alarm or anxiety in the girl's voice. On the contrary, she was cheerful and joking. Rachel promised to meet her friend on Monday, but these plans were not destined to come true. When the police visited John Combs, the main suspect in the case, he provided what seemed to be an impeccable alibi. At first glance, everything added up. Numerous independent witnesses confirmed his words. However, the cops understood that the words of a hardened convict should not be blindly trusted, and decided to check this information more carefully. During the investigation, detectives managed to track the geolocation of the suspect's mobile phone. This data exposed Combs' lies and provided the investigation with sufficient material to bring charges. Convinced of the man's involvement in Rachel's disappearance, law enforcement officers arrested him. It was a coordinated arrest. In addition to the leader of the criminal group, several of his accomplices were also put behind bars. Investigators hoped to hear their version of the events leading up to Rachel's mysterious disappearance. Combs began cooperating with justice from the first minutes after his detention, as soon as he was put in a police car. He confessed to killing the girl because she mocked him, provoking an outburst of aggression. However, these words were of little value without concrete facts and evidence. The suspect said that he and the victim went to the island, near the place where her severed leg was later found. There, a quarrel broke out between them. Rachel demanded money from Combs, claiming that he had slept with her teenage girls. Enraged by such accusations, John decided that Rachel deserved to die. He stabbed her in the chest and then strangled her. During the interrogation, the man described in detail how he took the body home and cold-bloodedly dismembered it in the bathroom, like a piece of meat from a store. With gruesome details, he recounted how he separated the limbs from the torso, skillfully cutting the tendons. Combs admitted that he cut out the tattoo from the victim's skin, chopped off her breasts, and then threw the mutilated remains from the pier into the water. Even more horror was added to this story by the testimony of Nicole Godfrey, an acquaintance of the killer. She was present during the bloody massacre that took place in the bathroom. According to her, at the height of this monstrous bacchanalia, Combs invited her to look at his work. However, law enforcement officers were in no hurry to blindly trust the words of the detainee, because it was still unclear at what exact moment the victim's death occurred. Arriving at the crime scene, the police carefully examined every corner in search of evidence. However, it became obvious that the killer had made a lot of effort to cover his tracks. He thoroughly washed the floor and walls with detergents and bleach. Nevertheless, a few tiny blood stains were found in the bathroom, and a DNA analysis confirmed that it belonged to Rachel. As it turned out, this was far from Combs' first crime. He had previously been convicted twice for murder. In this regard, the media and the public had a natural question: how could the Australian Themis consider this monster worthy of parole and release him? After all, less than 2 years had passed since he was released from prison, and he already had a third victim on his account. The brutal murder of Rachel, whose body the inhumane man mocked even after death, shook the whole country and caused a wide public outcry. In October 2009, John Combs was officially charged with first-degree murder. The relatives and friends of the deceased were not surprised by this development. They had repeatedly warned the girl that a relationship with this man would not lead to anything good, but she could not overcome the destructive addiction. In court, the case turned out to be extremely confusing. The defense clung to every inconsistency, of which, fortunately for Combs, there were many. The defendant and his lawyers tried in every possible way to confuse the investigation. For example, John accused Rachel herself of allegedly using teenage girls, selling them for money. But both witnesses in court refuted these unfounded statements, defending the honor of the deceased. The trial dragged on until 2011. All this time, the accused gave absurd interviews left and right, as if enjoying the public attention. The media picked up his every remark, inflating this local story to the scale of a national tragedy. Only on August 26, 2011, the court finally passed a verdict in this high-profile case. John Leslie Combs was found guilty of premeditated murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without the right to parole. When he was being led out of the courtroom, the victims' relatives had to watch as the hardened criminal, openly mocking their grief, defiantly made obscene gestures with his hands. His entire insolent appearance eloquently testified to the complete absence of remorse or even a hint of a pang of conscience. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Until next time, friends.